Growing up, I always wished I had a superpower. See, public health scientists who focus on preventative medicine have the opportunity to see the future. It's almost like looking into a crystal ball by being able to predict the future, finding risk factors earlier on in life so that we can act on those risk factors and prevent disease. One of the key ways that we know how a country is doing in terms of how it's protecting its population in terms of health is to measure certain types of metrics. And two of the key metrics that are measured, according to the World Health Organization, are chronic disease in a country and maternal child health. So chronic diseases, there's various kinds. And the one that I focus on in my research is type 2 diabetes. It is the most prevailing metabolic disease worldwide, and to some degree, it is largely preventable. The other thing I focus on in my research is maternal child health. So how are moms doing? How are their babies doing? And as their children grow, how do they develop? So we're going to have to go back to a little bit of our high school biology to recall some of the concepts I'm going to talk about today. So let's break down type 2 diabetes. First of all, there are three types of diabetes: type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 3 is also known as gestational diabetes, or diabetes with first onset during pregnancy. Type 2 and type 3, or gestational diabetes, are very similar. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of our biology. So when we consume food, the food is broken down and digested into a form of energy called glucose. So after we eat, the glucose levels in our body start to increase, and that triggers the pancreas to produce insulin so that the insulin will bind onto our cells, and it's like a lock and key, opening up the cells to allow the glucose to enter, and then our cells have the energy of glucose to do their functions. So here's an image. So you might have to double click on my image now in order to see this a little bigger, because I've done it old school on a whiteboard. So here we have our image of the cell right here. And around the cell are these receptors where insulin will bind. So insulin is shown here in this blue triangle, and the glucose is shown as these yellow circles. So after we eat a meal, the glucose levels rise and the insulin will be released from the pancreas, binding onto the cell like a lock and key, opening it up so these glucose molecules can get in and feed the cell. So shown another way, just to help check our understanding, I'm going to show you an image, just like it's kind of like a graph, but don't be afraid. I'm going to break it down for you. So when we consume a meal, the glucose in our body is released into the bloodstream and it increases. In the same way, insulin will increase and match that glucose curve. And eventually, if insulin's doing its job, you'll see in the bloodstream the glucose levels coming down because it's entering into the cells. And eventually, you're going to get hungry again and you'll eat another meal, and so on and so forth. But when we eat something that's really high in sugar, high in fat, our glucose spikes very quickly. It gets broken down really quickly and it releases into our bloodstream so that it increases super fast. And then insulin matches that super fast response and brings the glucose down super fast, super low. And then you feel really hungry, you have a craving, and on the cycle goes, because you'll probably pick a snack that's really sugary to satisfy that sudden hunger. And then we'll have this erratic curve. So just to make sure we're on the same page and check our understanding, I'm going to show you with a prop two types of bread. So the top slice up here is a bread with lots of grain, lots of fiber, there's seeds in there. And the bottom slice down here is just your regular old white bread. So white bread gets broken down and the glucose is released very quickly into the bloodstream. Whereas the bread, the top bread, the fibrous bread, has a lot of ingredients in it that the body has to break down and work quite hard digestively to break it down. And so there's a slower release of glucose. Can I get some volunteer to tell me which curve, the A or the B, does the grainy bread represent? The grainy. Yes, okay, you guys are on the ball. Okay, just checking. You know, it is like the evening time. So you're totally on the ball. You're absolutely correct. You know, you are correct. I had to double check. So that's really how it should go, is that when we have meals that are high in nutritious and fibrous food ingredients, our body takes its time in the digestive process, and slow release of glucose means a corresponding slow release of insulin. Insulin can do its job really well. But when we have type 2 diabetes happening, what occurs is that two things. One is that the pancreas is being assaulted continuously by foods that basically make it have to work really hard to release lots of insulin to compensate. And in that process, something called beta cell fatigue happens. The cells in the pancreas are called beta cells, and they get tired. And so slowly over time, they don't produce enough insulin. The other thing that's happening with type 2 diabetes is the binding mechanism, the lock and key mechanism doesn't work very well. The cells are becoming what's called resistant to insulin, resistant to its effect of unlocking it to allow the glucose molecules inside. And so this happens over time after years and years of this repeated assault of poor dietary habits. So you're probably already getting your light bulbs going off thinking, oh, I can see where the prevention comes in, right? So let's talk about that. We normally diagnose type 2 diabetes around 50 years of age or older. In pregnancy, of course, we diagnose it during the pregnancy. But the signals for this risk factor of glucose intolerance and insulin resistance actually happens long before we ever diagnose it. So how long before, you're wondering? 10 years before, 20 years before? What if I told you that it happens as early as when you're developing in your mom's belly? Yeah. In utero. That's how early the signals are happening that indicate to us as public health scientists, we got to pay attention to this person or this population because they're at high risk. So now again, we're going to have to tap into our biology to remember some of that high school knowledge that will help us understand this next part. Now, when a mom consumes food during her pregnancy, when she consumes nutritious foods, that glucose curve that we just talked about, those curves, that same pattern is happening when mom's eating food. So when mom has a healthy diet, that glucose curve is going to come up. The glucose levels will come up and they'll come down with a nice slow release of glucose and a corresponding slow release of insulin. So that's why it's so important for mom to eat well, because when this glucose is in the bloodstream, it makes its way to baby's bloodstream through the placenta and the umbilical cord. So now we're paying attention to baby. Type 2 is not the same as juvenile. Juvenile is like, you probably recognize, that's type 1, and it's you probably recognize it as like young children having to have insulin shots. Now that's because the body doesn't produce insulin. That's a different type of deficit that's happening. It's usually genetic, and what's happening is that the body is not producing insulin. Whereas in type 2 diabetes, the insulin is there. Often actually in copious amounts, the response is there. It's that binding to the cell that is the primary problem. And then, sorry, the other question was the butter to the bread. Great. Great idea. So, it seems ironic because you think, oh, should I put butter on my bread? It's high fat, right? But if you can choose the right butter or the right amount of butter, or maybe if you put some butter and throw on some chia seeds, you can boost the nutritional value of your ordinary white bread. And you'll basically slow the digestive process because now you're adding another layer of complex nutrients that the digestive system has to work through in order to have that slow release of the glucose. So back to what I was mentioning before, and this kind of ties in, if mom's eating that bread that she's put some butter on and maybe she's added chia seeds and made that boosted the nutritional value of that bread, then baby's glucose levels will also follow a similar pattern of the glucose levels of mom. So if mom is eating well and she has steady glucose levels, so will baby. So this is an interesting thing that happens when baby's glucose levels go high. When baby's glucose levels are kind of erratic, like this image, because baby's responding in the same way that mom's responding, the insulin levels in baby's pancreas, baby's pancreas will skyrocket that insulin. So the interesting thing about insulin is that it is a growth hormone. So it'll cause baby to grow bigger and bigger. And baby will eventually be classified as something called LGA, or large for gestational age. The problem with LGA is that when baby gets too big during the delivery, as baby makes his way through the birth canal, what will happen is baby will have an increased chance of a head, neck, or shoulder injury. And these injuries, they don't just resolve themselves. It's a long-term issue that they have to deal with. The second and really key to our discussion today thing that happens is that genes, as baby is developing, are turned on and off. And one of the genes that gets turned on during this hyperglycemic, high glucose life in the womb is the gene that predisposes baby to a life with type 2 diabetes. So we already know when a baby has LGA and when a mom's pregnancy is affected by diabetes, we see that the signal is there for the longer term development of eventual type 2 diabetes. So surveillance really matters. In the years following the pregnancy and in the years following that baby's delivery, we have to watch and make sure that these people who are affected are educated, informed, they have the knowledge to make the right decisions, and they have access to food that is nutritious and can help support a lifestyle that prevents type 2 diabetes eventually occurring. The other thing that's really important to know is that moms who have gestational diabetes, 70% of them will go on to develop type 2 diabetes. So this is something that is a major risk factor that we can watch. And this is kind of like what I'm talking about the superpower of preventative medicine, is to be able to detect these signals, measure them, see that they're occurring, and inform patients and empower them with the knowledge so that they can take the steps to prevent chronic diseases. And what's cool is you have this superpower too. If you think about it, you have the superpower of choice and the superpower of knowledge, to take the knowledge that you gain and apply it and to make healthy decisions day after day. Does that mean you're never going to have a cookie or a slice of cake? No way. You will. But what you want to do is make sure that the choices in the day, there are more options of where you have healthier foods and you're putting more fibrous foods in your body than there are times where you're eating that chocolate cake. So we could do one more example if you want for fun, because I got something here. So I have some orange juice here and I've got an orange. Let's look back at our graph here. So who thinks the orange with all its fiber is following the pattern of glucose and insulin release of A or B? Yes, I got a B in there. Oh, wow, you guys, there's a couple of, you know what, that's fantastic. So I'm glad that there's a little bit of healthy uncertainty here. So, you know what, if you had to have a choice between an orange or an orange juice, yes, there are nutritious values and nutritional content of an orange juice, but a lot of the nutritional content has been removed. So what we talk about in science is something called bioavailable. How quickly can a food be digested so that it's bioavailable nutrients into the bloodstream quickly? And the orange juice is kind of just like the white bread. It's going to be released quickly into the bloodstream. There's not much that your body has to do to break this down. And so you'll have B happening with the juice, and by extension, the opposite is true for the orange. Your body's got to do a little bit more work to break down this orange and release the sugar. So of course, if you have type 2 diabetes, you're going to measure your blood sugar after you have an orange, and it's going to be a little higher. But before you have type 2 diabetes, well before, in the years before you're diagnosed, your body, if it's working efficiently, is going to break down this orange much more efficiently than it would if it was breaking down the orange juice. Not much to break down here. Does that make sense? Tell me, I see a question. Mike, access to healthy food choices is what I meant, so it becomes a broader public health, social justice issue. That is such an important point, and that's something we see in Toronto. Oh, you're just making a comment, eh? Well, I mean, I will make that point though. Yeah, you know, in Toronto, this is something that extends my research when we talk about food insecurity in Toronto. you'll see, like, I worked at St. Michael's Hospital for a number of years, and our patients at St. Michael's Hospital are generally speaking inner city, but just a couple of blocks away is Mount Sinai Hospital, completely different patient population. And there is significant food insecurity in just within a few blocks. And so a lot of times people make these types of choices. It's not necessarily because they're shying away from eating vegetables. It might be a cost and an access issue. So that is an important thing to bring up. So what in the, like, if we had all the money in the world and we could do whatever research we want, we would measure women before they conceive, because the way that metabolism works is it happens long before a woman is actually pregnant, that she's bearing the risk factors for a pregnancy that will be affected with gestational diabetes. There are, however, key points in the pregnancy to pay attention to. Now, the first 12 weeks, you've probably heard that people don't announce their pregnancy because lots of things might happen in those first 12 weeks. It's a delicate period, but the organ function begins immediately, and slowly the cell differentiation will occur for different organs. And so when we really pay attention to diabetes and the development of diabetes is around 12 weeks, because we can measure in mom certain risk factors that might occur. So one of the things that we do in our research is we measure the tummy fat. So it's not as simple as, oh, if a woman starts her pregnancy obese, she has a high chance of type 2 diabetes or gestational diabetes. Absolutely, that's true, but not all obesity is created equal. Women of South Asian and East Asian ancestry, for example, may not appear phenotypically obese, but they carry some adiposity or fat around their organs, and that is the highest risk fat. We can measure that fat in pregnancy when a woman comes for her 12-week ultrasound, her routine ultrasound for her baby. We can measure the fat and see how much fat there is in relation to the organs, and we can tell that there's probably a risk that she'll develop later on in pregnancy some kind of glucose problem. Whether it's actually at the threshold to be called diabetes or not, we don't know necessarily, but we know that there's probably a chance that she'll have high glucose. So when it really starts to affect baby is sometime in the second trimester. So I mean, as in the earlier stages, we worry more about more concrete developmental cardiac issues. And then after 12 weeks, when we know the pregnancy is getting more and more stable over time, we start to wonder in the second trimester about diabetes. And the late second trimester is when we actually diagnose it. And much of the literature suggests that we could diagnose it earlier, but it would be a huge cost to the healthcare system to be checking everybody in early stages of the second trimester, when most people will develop diabetes later on in the second trimester. But as early as 12 weeks, we want to start paying attention to it. There's a lot of argument for certain people being able to access the type of fat measurement we're talking about, because we don't even do a waist circumference during pregnancy. And we know that waist circumference is a good parameter to measure as an indicator for adiposity around the midsection. But there is some literature to suggest, my own included, that if we measure the fat and the adiposity using ultrasound in early pregnancy for the at-risk women, the women we know have a family history, the women we know are East Asian and South Asian, we could use it as a marker to prevent disease later, but it is not routine at the moment. So I haven't seen any literature on actually modifying the glucose bioavailability of the fruit, but I mean, it's an interesting question whether there are other complications related to the development of diabetes. I haven't seen any literature on it. It's a really great question. I think I'm going to take a look and find out. I'm really passionate about, and I'm doing a lot of research now, and I've always included ethnicity in my research, but I'm now more focused on health disparities and health inequity in medicine. And of course, bringing COVID brought to bear a lot of the inequities, shone a bright light on it, so we can't ignore it anymore. And I think pregnancy is no different. My real instinct, and from what I'm seeing from my colleagues in the field, some of them much more experienced than I am, is that we're not paying attention enough to race and ethnicity in healthcare. And so knowing that majority of women who have type 2 diabetes in pregnancy, gestational diabetes in pregnancy, the majority of people affected by diabetes later on in life are Black, Hispanic, South Asian, East Asian. And we know that their risk factors are different than the traditional risk factors. It really is important that we pay close attention to those particular groups and offer a more customized form of healthcare where we pay attention to their risk factors and not just the general recommendations that we have. Another really key example of this is birth weight curves. When a baby is born, we decide if that baby is healthy or not based on birth weight curves. But those birth weight curves are actually based on Caucasian populations. So that South Asian and East Asian babies, for example, will be graphed on that curve and they'll show as small for gestational age, like they're not healthy. And then all the guidance from physician to mom and dad in that process is going to be about bulking that baby up, helping that baby gain weight, when really it might not be a problem. If we measure them on their ethnic specific birth weight curves, they're just fine. So you can see that health inequity, race, and ethnicity are so key to offering effective and accurate healthcare. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you guys for your wonderful questions. I appreciate it.